sector in Africa particularly hard as travel restrictions made it challenging to appreciate our heritage. Today, we will take a look at lessons learned across Africa in preserving our arts, culture and heritage. Director for Arts and Culture, and Professor George Abungu, the CEO of Okello Abungu Heritage Consultants. Thank you so much to my panelists for joining me. Now, starting with you, Angela, of course, we are taking the theme from the AU. Basically, the AU has decided to put using arts, culture and heritage to build the Africa that we want as the center of discussions. And of course, we have extended it by putting in the year of Charlotte Maxeke. Just from you, why has the AU chosen this theme to focus on for this year? And is it a priority for all member states?
Thank you, Zenati. Good morning, Honorable Minister. Good morning, Professor Abu. Effort into promoting arts, culture and heritage on the continent. The question was also related whether it is a priority. Yes, it is a priority and has enshrined in major policy continental instruments of the Union, including the African Union Agenda 2063, the Charter for Arts, Culture and Heritage. The work of cultural workers on the continent is very much a priority, and we hope that through the Year of Arts, Culture and Heritage, we are able to provide the necessary support that the sector needs in order to contribute to the development of the continent. Thank you.
Now, moving on to Minister, now the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture has extended this theme by dedicating, the use of arts, culture and heritage to build the Africa we want. Minister, you are muted. Please, can you unmute?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm sorry. I was talking to myself. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, we can hear you now.
To you, Ms. Zanati Kuma, our Program Director, to Ms. Angela Martins, Head of Cultural Division of the AU, and Professor George Abungu. Thank you very much. The choice for this year of the country as part of the bigger chapter of the choice of AU
Especially in 2020, of course, we do know because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions. We will delve into those issues a little bit later. But just going to you, Prof. Abungu, I know that you do need to leave to give a talk at UNESCO shortly, but you will be joining us. But it is Africa World Heritage Day. And talking about UNESCO, Africa is underrepresented in the UNESCO World Heritage List. And at the same time, a lot of those properties are in the in danger category. Why this underrepresentation on that UNESCO Heritage List? And also, I mean, why are some of these properties in danger?
Thank you so much, Zenati. First of all, as is our tradition and our culture, let me first of all start by thanking the Republic of South Africa for organizing this, and particularly the Minister for Arts and Culture, Honorable Nathi Mthethwa, who has led from the front in promoting cultural heritage in the continent. And of course, our sister, Angela Martins, whose docket at EU has ensured that at least this long forgotten area and long underfunded area is now in the forefront of UNESCO, of African Union agenda through the 2063 agenda, as well as the current year of arts, culture, and heritage. Before I jump into the question of underrepresentation, maybe I would just like to stress, as the Minister and Angela has started the ball rolling, really on the role of arts, culture, and heritage in the lives of the Africans. I think this is something that sits at the core of our lives, and we have to recognize that. In Africa, we are born in culture, in arts, and in heritage. We live it. The drum beats, the melodies, the arts and crafts, and even in death that we see daily now, the soulful mourning are part of it. So we live it. It's our lives. Our cultures basically affects our lives and are meant to do so positively, as this is part of bringing up good citizens, as we know. But we also know that when we misuse them, they become weapons of division, oppression, and discrimination. So these are characteristics of the cultures that we have. But I think the most important thing is that we need to recognize and position arts, culture, and heritage at the center of our lives. And we are grateful for African Union and South Africa and other African countries for doing this, particularly through the heads of states meetings that have recognized this. Now, coming back to the World Heritage, Africa has the largest number of World Heritage in danger and the least number in the list. These are due to political and historical reasons. As you know, and I think this is why arts, culture, and heritage is so important for us, and we need to be playing this role at the front. As a colonized people, our heritage, our voices were not dominant. We were discussing issues with parts of the world that dictated what we did. And so even when the UNESCO 1972 convention, that basically was also very much influenced by actions that were taking place in Egypt, for example, the Aswan Dam, so that to save humanity's culture. So Africa contributed directly to its founding. We find that we are still underrepresented. Why are we underrepresented? We are underrepresented, first of all, because listing takes a lot of resources. We need proper preparation. We need capacity building. We need to be able to do proper nomination dossiers. In Africa, in most cases, heritage and culture and arts is never privileged enough to get those resources by governments to do that kind of work. Secondly, compared to other northern or western nations that put a lot of money. So we don't put a lot of money in that. The other thing is in terms of the conservation. There are challenges. We are always not very much in the forefront of putting all the resources in conserving our heritage. So we send them for listing. They're fantastic. We have some of the greatest, largest, properties in the World Heritage, and then they're neglected through poaching and so many other things. The third one are the conflicts that we have. We have a lot of conflicts in Africa, and we know that a continent in conflict cannot live and thrive. Can we use, I pose this question back to you and to all of us. If we are constantly in conflict, if we are not able to use our heritage, our culture, and our arts to bring peace, can we thrive? Can we use our arts, culture, and heritage to create peace in conflict areas so that we don't have problems in DRC, in Central Africa, where all their sites are actually in danger list? Can we use arts, culture, and heritage to sincerely and truthfully dialogue on issues such as xenophobia, negative ethnicity, tribalism, corruption, sexism, and others? These are the crucial issues. And where there is conflict, definitely you would expect that even our heritage, including those ones in the World Heritage, will not be resourced, we will not build capacity, we will not be able to organize ourselves enough to be able to take care of them. So we end up being in the forefront of leading the other parts of the world with our sites in the danger list. So for me, and I believe for the rest of the continent, it is a new breath to see that we are positioning arts, culture, and heritage in the front line so that we can be able also to resource them, so we can remove our sites in the danger list and also be able to list more sites and compete with the rest of the world. Thank you, Zinda.
Indeed, thank you very much, Prof. Indeed, a continent that is in conflict cannot thrive. And of course, we've got the background on the issues that we will be tackling today. But this program is really about finding workable solutions to the issues that we face as a continent. And of course, one thing that COVID-19 has taught us is that we can't kumbaya out of problems. We need to know what they are and to act effectively. Just going back to you, Minister, I mean, we do know that along with the tourism sector, arts and culture has been hit particularly hard by COVID-19. This is a sector that accounts for 30 million jobs globally. And I mean, governments all over the world have worked to support all different kinds of sectors, including the arts and culture sector. Just walk me through some of the relief measures that South Africa has taken to support artists or professions in arts, culture and heritage.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Perhaps before the relief, because relief is just that, it's the relief. What we are looking for in this space is self-sufficiency in the space, to ensure that the space grows, arts, culture and heritage gets appreciated through its universal value in the contribution towards social progress. And I want all of us, and this is what we shared with our colleagues, ministers of culture earlier in the year, to really follow on the footsteps of the AU. The AU, from its inception as OAU and the OAU Charter, particularly Article 2A of the Charter, which affirms the commitment of the member states to the coordination and harmonization of their policies in the domain of educational and cultural cooperation. Now, what that means is that it is incumbent upon member states to ensure that we lift this very important aspect of our lives. As Professor has touched, for instance, on the World Heritage sites, the endangered ones, and so on. One of the challenges which Prof, I thought was going to touch on this matter is the competition, particularly on the African continent, the competition between economic development and heritage preservation. that has been the major area which has seen Africa lagging behind, particularly as compared to Europe and others and so on that matter, because the competing needs of our people have always to be taken into account. Coming to the specific question you are asking about the relief measures. Right from the onset, we saw that we are going to face a big problem of highest proportions, because in a capitalist society, you cannot shut down a sector of the economy, shut it down totally, and have no negative consequences after that. So when the sector was shut down, we then devised relief measures as the department. And these relief measures were taking into account that what the sector is faced with is imposed on it, is imposed on humanity. It's not a choice, not per choice. So therefore, we had these phases of relief. Right now, we are on phase 2 of the relief. And whilst we were doing that, and I must make a disclaimer that whatever relief you come with is not going to be enough, because relief is just that. It's short-term in nature, that after somebody has exhausted that relief, would then want another relief. It goes like that. But we were fortunate that the president created the presidential stimulus package to further assist on the relief for the creatives and broadly the sporting sector in our country. And it's those reliefs which are not a panacea, but they have, made an impact to those who have received the relief. Because again, you have finite budgetary resources in government. And if you look at one department, it becomes even an onerous task, as it were. But the most important thing for us is that we thought that we needed to lift this aspect. Over a period of time, we recognize this month, May, as a month, as Africa Month, focusing on the Africa Day on the 25th of March, but celebrating our Africanness and involving the cultural and creative sector to sustain itself, to have activities around this month, whilst at the same time integrating ourselves as a continent, both culturally, socially, economically, and otherwise. And we believe that the Africa Month, as a program, initially of which we introduced in 2015 in South Africa, today, the 5th the Pan-African Cultural Congress adopted it as its flagship. And we think that in that way, through tangible, sustainable programs, we are then going to sustain the cultural and creative industries.
Thank you, Minister. Now, just sticking to that point of financial support, just going to you, Angela, we are calling on talented scholars and professionals in the arts and culture space to basically help us build the Africa that we want. But I mean, we are calling on those people, but at the same time, a lot of them say that they are at the bottom of the priority list in terms of financial support. And I just want to know from you, what kind of policies is the AU creating or developing to make sure that this space is more economically viable so that we can reach a stage of self-sufficiency, as the Minister mentioned?
I was saying thank you, Zenati, for the question. The intervention that the African Union does in the area of arts, culture, and heritage are basically related to policies. So we have development of policies that I mentioned earlier on. Then we have advocacy of policies, like we have the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance. We also have the AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries. We have the AU Model Law on the Protection of Cultural Property and Heritage. And we also have the Statute on the African Audiovisual and Cinema Commissions. So with these policies, we basically monitor their implementations in the member states. We also work closely with the producers and promoters of arts and culture to ensure that these continental policies are implemented. Now, with regards to financing of the arts, culture, and heritage sector, the 33rd AU Assembly, which was held in February 2020, took a decision which is for member states to provide 1% of their budgets into the arts, culture, and heritage sector. You might think that 1% is a very low percentage of the national budget for arts and culture, but you will see that there are member states that are still not financing enough the sector. So this 1% will be a boost into the cultural and creative industries to make Conference of Ministers of Arts, Culture, and Heritage last year, where ministers of all the continent were engaging on their initiatives with regards to responding to the pandemic. It was a very informative session in which ministers were sharing their best practices on what packages they were giving to the arts, culture, and heritage workers in order to revive the sector because of the pandemic. We followed up with many of the member states, and some of these decisions that were made in the Conference of Ministers are being implemented. Of course, as Minister Mutetwa mentioned, it's not enough, but we are still working towards that, and we are sensitizing member states to find interactive ways for cultural workers to produce art and culture. Thank you.
And the goal is really to find interactive ways to build that sector back to where it's supposed to be. And just, I understand that Prof. Abungu, you haven't left us yet. Are you still there?
I'm very much here, Zenati. I think it's quite interesting, so I'm sort of a bit hooked.
Thank you very much.
Say one more thing, I'll leave you and I'll come back.
Thank you very much. Just, talking about economic viability and the impact of COVID-19, we have seen some museums and heritage sites closing down. I mean, just here in South Africa, we are facing a potential permanent closure of the Apartheid Museum and Lily's Leaf Farm. And I mean, you spoke about how we need money for that conservation. Should this be only a government-led initiative, or do we need the private sector involved, and what's in it for them?
Thank you very much, Zanetta. I think this is a very interesting area to look at, and especially when we are discussing the contribution of arts, culture, and heritage to economy. But let me just go back a little and pick up on what the minister said on the first question that you raised. I think it is Africa that really did demonstrate at the World Heritage setup that we should not just conserve for the sake of conservation, but that we need to be able to use what we have for benefiting our communities, for uplifting and for empowering our communities to be economically sustainable. And this sometimes goes in contrast with what you have in the West, where sometimes conservation is just done for the sake of conservation. Now, what the minister raised, the competition between heritage, conservation, and development is at the core of the problems that we have with World Heritage listing. We were late starters because we were colonized, but we should not be mourning over colonialism 50, 60. years later, after the first countries were, decolonized or moved away from colonialism. But what we are saying is that we need to we need to shift the paradigm. We need to think about heritage as a resource rather than heritage as just something to view and to enjoy and forget about it. So the competition that the minister raised, I think what we need is for the international community to understand that in Africa we live the heritage. So we should be able to use them just as much as we conserve it. Now, coming back to the question of what you just raised with the museums and the COVID pandemic has created havoc. We have had lockdowns and closing of sites, loss of incomes with many consequences, which include, retrenchments. In parks like in DRC and Central Africa, we have seen many of the guards being killed, so loss of life. The question then, what are the strategies and dynamics in the arts, culture, and heritage that are contributing towards the emerging out of this pandemic and building a post-COVID normal? We need to start asking ourselves, because I think it's by asking ourselves these questions that we'll find our place, what role we can be able to play. Should we, in the area of arts and culture, just continue mourning over the lost jobs, over lost opportunities, without taking the center stage? I think the key issue here for me is that we have left this pandemic issue to be purely a health and an economic issue, and not a cultural one. Then when we cannot shake hands, or we cannot hug, or we cannot collectively mourn our dead, is this not a cultural issue? What role are museums and other heritage institutions playing in creating awareness, in being there at the forefront of advocacy, in community solidarity to deal with the pandemic? I think these are the questions that will give us an answer on how we can be able to position ourselves. I think that we need to be able to stop being bystanders and play the third pillar. In addition to the economic side, in addition to the health side, we should be the third pillar, that human, we bring the human element, because humans are cultural animals, and only through human actions can solutions be found. So the pandemic, as devastating as it is, I think that arts, culture, and heritage should start thinking very seriously on what we need to do. The museums that you are saying are closing, have they run out of ideas? Have they run out funding from the private sector? In this case, we are all in it. There is nothing like private sector. There is nothing like government. There is nothing like NGO. We are all in it. And I like the way that the United Nations Secretary General always, stresses the point that if the North or the West decide to, vaccinate their people, they will still have a problem as long as one part of the world is not vaccinated. And the same with us here. If we do not involve everybody, including the private sector, including the civil society, including the government, we will continue to suffer, all of us. So it is the responsibility of everybody, and using culture, heritage, and arts as a third pillar, in addition to the economics or the financial, as well as the health. And in that case, when we do that, then we'll be relevant, then we'll be able to get resources, and we will be able to play a role that we need to play to be able to deal with this pandemic once and for all, and not to close and mourn over lost jobs. Thank you, Zanetta.
Very interesting. Yes,
Yes.
very interesting point that you made there, Prof, because for the past year or so, we've been talking about how COVID-19 is not just a health issue, that it's now an economic issue, but nobody has actually mentioned that it is also a cultural issue because we can't interact, and a lot of our culture comes from human interaction. So very, very interesting point that you make there. And, you know, as you said, we need to include everybody, the government, the private sector, and just a comment that we've got from our audience, we need to ensure that the youth is also brought into the communication fold to discuss issues of arts and culture and heritage in Africa, as they are our future. And just talking about the youth, we've gotten a background of the issues that we are facing, but we need to now look at the lessons that we have learned from COVID-19. And one of those is digitization or digitalization. Not really sure what the word is. It's not my first language, but I guess that's also what we are celebrating on this World Heritage Day, or Africa Heritage Day. But I mean, Minister, just going to that digitization, we have seen artists not being able to perform during the hard lockdown. A lot of artists moving to digital platforms to try and eke out an income. And I mean, just, you know, although those platforms can't replace a live show or the beauty of a live show, we do know that innovation is very important in that sphere. And what is the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture doing to make sure that innovation is supported for professionals in the arts and culture space?
The fourth industrial revolution is no longer a theory. It's now practice. It also affects the cultural and creative sector. And I'm glad that you made that disclaimer that one does not replace the other. The live events will always have its space in the cultural and creative sector. But at the same time, we have, through this relief program, been encouraging the digitization space, where we've asked people to come up with ideas, and we funded them. So we think that it's something we need to ensure that we put as a priority, that our cultural and creative practitioners are fair with it, because even government at a broader scale, we are doing that. You know, the National Archives, for instance, in this country, fall under us, and we are on that path at that level, where we are digitizing all our, you know, works and so on. There are some technology which are obsolete now, like the dicta belts, for instance. If I can make an example, we have more than 200 hours of the Rivonia trial, which has been digitized. Many people have never had that trial since it happened in 1964, and many other aspects. We've also moved to engage in a process where we, as I said when I started, we've focused and targeted the AU archival material for digitization. And this is the work we've committed ourselves to do, and we are going to be doing that. So, but it's important that our youth in particular, as on their own, have started to look into this broader fourth industrial revolution as a reality, to encourage them to do more, because they have opened doors for themselves, in most cases with no assistance from anybody else, but doing it there for themselves. And we think that the future lies there, where we will not be left behind in this industrial fourth industrial development.
A very interesting point that you made there, that the Rivonia trial has now been digitized. I'm actually thinking I have a CD form of a story on the Rivonia trialists, and I'm actually thinking I haven't seen any indication that it has been digitized, but a very, very interesting point that you make there. And I mean, Angela, just sticking on this digital transformation issue, we do know that artists who are often overpaid or underpaid, have moved to digitization to leverage their offering. What is the AU doing to make sure that that digital transformation is accelerated, especially considering that Africa is considered a laggard in that digital transformation space?
Thank you for that. Allow me to talk about the Great Museum of Africa, which is a flagship project of the African Union Agenda 2063. And it will be established in Algeria. And this is a big initiative, a mega initiative of the continent. The Great Museum of Africa will be charged with the responsibility to negotiate the return of the illicit trafficked cultural property from the continent. And it is also charged with the responsibility to digitize all the assets that we have on the continent that will be housed at the museum. Of course, it's a project which is still in its infancy, but we hope that in the coming years, we will see a museum which we are all proud of and which celebrates Africa and its rich heritage. So digitization will be part of the museum. We are launching the temporary site of the museum during the course of this year as part of the activities of the Year of Arts, Culture and Heritage. We are also, as Minister Mteto was saying, we have this project of digitizing the materials that we have since the OAU time. To that effect, the Department of Materials that we have in the AU Commission. Thank you.
And of course, we do know that it's not just about trade and economics. Arts and culture is basically used to tell stories, real stories, and also some of those stories aren't pretty. We do know, we have experienced xenophobia and also gender-based violence. And I'd just like to know from my panelists, I think Professor Abungu has stepped out for the UNESCO talk, but just starting with you, Minister Mthethwa, how can we use arts and culture to basically to address those areas of negativity that we do see in society so that we can build back as united Africa?
The concept of Africa Month, celebrating our Africanness, integrating the whole of the continent, culturally, socially, economically, and politically, was primarily aimed at dealing with the development of the continent in all these aspects. And it was also aimed at making Africans know each other much better by internally on the continent, exporting cultural goods and services amongst ourselves, and ensuring that the people-to-people relations are strengthened, because we believe that if those things happen, you will have more understanding amongst Africans themselves. Because part of the problem is that from the South African point of view, for instance, we are still in a process of integration into the whole continent. We have not reached that yet. We have not reached there yet, but we are in that process since our democracy in 1994. These programs are very practical. We call them Africa Citizens programs, where we take practitioners here in South Africa to other countries and vice versa to showcase our cultural, our heritage products into those countries. But you also find that some of the countries on the continent know more about South Africa than perhaps South Africans do. 2016, for instance, as part of this program, we're in Gabon. And in Gabon, the Gabonese reminded us as we were there that, by the way, this year is the 30th anniversary of Sarafina. So we want you, artists, South African artists who are there, we had people like Nati Manganyi and others, to please sing, you know, the songs of Sarafina, of Brenda Fassie, and so on. So I think that through arts, through culture, through heritage, we are going to be able to undermine all the negativities around our country, because there is no foreigner who's an African elsewhere on the continent. Wherever you are, you can't be a foreigner on the African continent. We stress on the Africa Month program that having interacted with what we call our champions to further broaden our understanding of our continent. Our first guest of honor and champion, for instance, was Ben Okri from Nigeria, followed by Wole Soyinka, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and others. So those, we were making a point to us as South Africans and to the whole of the continent that we are one. We are Africans, all of us, and we should be able to respect each other, coexist, because part of the problem is that our erstwhile colonizers created amongst us mutual suspicion and mutual hatred, and we need to undermine that. And the best potent weapon to do that is through our culture.
Angela, I'll get back to you on what the AU is doing to address those areas of negativity, but I just want to stick with you, Minister. You mentioned that you'll have other Africans knowing more about South Africa and our history. I just mentioned a while ago that the Apartheid Museum and Lily's Leaf Farm, there's a potential of permanent closure there. And we do know, specifically with the Lily's Leaf Farm, it was already in a bad space even before COVID-19. How do we grow that appetite for people to actually be interested in, going to view these heritage sites? And how do you grow that appetite, especially considering the fact that you mentioned that we can't conserve for the sake of conservation?
Yes, you see, the thing is that the first port of call is that one. South Africans in their majority do not ordinarily visit museums. And for museums to be on the agenda, a lot of resources are needed for them to promote their work and so on. You look at more than 50 years or 60 years, some of the museums here in the country are still not visited as much as you'd see others in other countries. On the African continent, one of the things which we need to be working on is how do we get everybody involved in the public-private partnership, for instance, because if people look at government, we are mentioning Lily's Leaf, some of these museums and theaters, by the way, it's not only museums and theaters, the majority of them are not in the hands of government. They are in private hands. Government will come from time to time to assist here and there, like Lily's Leaf, for instance. And others are in the hands of local government and so on. So for the sustainability of museums, you can do whatever you do now, and post-COVID-19, perhaps you save one or two of them, but how are they going to be able to sustain themselves? They've not been able to, perhaps with the exception of those who have been there for a very long time, like Fort Trekker Monument and so on, they are still facing challenge, because if then they had this support through visitations. During the COVID-19 period, you have shut that door, and therefore we need to rethink of what is it that we need to do. How do we generate the interest? Because it's easy for people to say, but what is government doing and so on, and not realizing that these institutions depend by and large on the support from the public to visit them, for them to survive, because they are not there for themselves. They are there for development, for economic sustainability.
Thank you, Minister. Moving on to Angela, just going back to that question, we do know of, obviously, of negative areas that are basically hindering unity in Africa. And what are some of the things that the AU is doing to use arts and culture to address those areas of negativity?
Thank you again for the question. As I mentioned previously, our main role is at policy level. So by member states ratifying and implementing the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, which is a very powerful tool for social cohesion, for building a culture for peace on the continent, I think we will be able to overcome some of these challenges. Also enshrining and promoting the spirit of Pan-Africanism, which is related to our common interest as Africans, and unity of the continent, integration, and also which is a political and cultural movement to make our voice heard in the global arena. I think these are some of the issues that are strongly highlighted in the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, as well as the other instruments of the AU. If we have member states ratifying and implementing such instruments, we will go a long way in getting a continent which is at peace with itself and a global, a strong component in the global arena. We have planned, as in the Year of Arts, Culture and Heritage, the launch of the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, which will be held on the 25th of May. We are inviting all member states to participate at this event, which will be a grand will be an opportunity for the young people to learn more about this vision of an integrated, peaceful, and prosperous Africa, driven by its own citizen and being a dynamic force in the global arena. Apart from having this event, we also have, in the concept note of the theme of the year, a lot of activities which are related to the building of a culture for peace on the continent. For instance, in collaboration with UNESCO and also the government of Angola, we will be organizing the second Biennale on a Culture for Peace, which is also a very big event to promote our culture, arts, and heritage on the continent. And we hope that all member states will also be able to participate and showcase their arts and heritage in that event. We also congratulate South Africa for this initiative of the Africa Month. As Minister Mutetwa has mentioned, this initiative was adopted as an AU program in the Pan-African Cultural Congress, which was then approved by the policy organs of the Union. So we also, by engaging in initiatives like Africa Month, like the Biennale on a Culture for Peace, like for instance, also we have the All Africa Music Awards, which is a very huge gathering which brings young people together and celebrates their talents and their engagement with the arts. We are going to be able to create a better society and a better continent. In terms of policies, also we are developing an arts education continental policy. We believe that if issues related to arts and culture and heritage and also African Renaissance are enshrined in the school curriculum, we will build our kids already knowing who we are and what we want to achieve as a continent. So this will also assist in removing all these challenges that we are facing regarding to xenophobia and other things alike. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Angela. We do have a question from our audience. I actually would have liked to pose this to Professor Abungu, but he had to dash out to give a talk for UNESCO. But I'll try maybe get in a quick one from my panelists that are left. So the question goes, what is Africa's response to restitution and repatriation of Africa's cultural treasures that are currently in Europe and North America? When will Africa return the sacred human remains of African ancestors whose remains were stolen from the graves during colonial and apartheid times and used for racist science? How can we claim to be free if our own ancestors' human remains are still locked in museological prisons and scientific institutions in Europe and North America? Minister, would you like to have a go at that?
Oh, yes. I think that we have seen a lot of repatriation of a number of things, mortal remains and other artifacts elsewhere in other countries on the continent and in South Africa here. We have seen the gap. If you talk, for instance, Sarah Baartman's remains, if you talk of people like David Stearman and others, we've been doing that and we'll continue to do it. Uncle J.P. Max, Moses Kotane, Net Nakasa, you can name them. But it is not enough because that process itself is not a cheap process. Just the repatriation of one item, one mortal remains, and so on. In South Africa, we have, in the past few months this year, since the beginning of the month, been, improving the repatriation policy itself and reviving it, as it were. It's foremost in our ideas and in our programs. We believe that South Africa and Africa generally is rich but poorer because of her own artifacts, of her own belongings, heritage or items with heritage significance out there in Europe and in other countries.
Angela, any thoughts on policy action on restitution and repatriation of Africa's cultural treasures on your side?
Yes, indeed. As I was mentioning, we have the establishment of the Great Museum of Africa, which is a flagship project of the AU Agenda 2063, and which is tasked with the responsibility of initiating negotiations for the return of illicit trafficked cultural property and heritage. Of course, this is a bilateral issue, but at continental level, our role will basically be to develop negotiation frameworks to assist member states in this regard. We also have the AU Model Law on the Protection of Cultural Property and Heritage, which will assist member states in strengthening their legislation in this regard in order to avoid that more artworks are looted. But we are, as the Commission, we are ready to work with member states in negotiating with member states that have taken artworks or have looted artworks from the continent for their return. As Minister was saying, we already see a lot of member states already negotiating, but we are ready to work with them and negotiate And the Great Museum of Africa will play a key role in this regard with the mandate that they have to be the hub of the illicitly trafficked cultural property from the continent. Thank you.
I understand that Professor is back, and I actually really wanted to pose this question to you, seeing as you are the heritage guy. So we have a question from our audience, and it goes, what is Africa's response to restitution and repatriation of Africa's cultural treasures that are currently in Europe and North America? When will Africa return the sacred human remains of African ancestors whose remains were stolen from the graves during colonial and apartheid times and used for race science? Any thoughts on that, Professor?
Zanetta, you asking me a question that is extremely close to my heart. It's close to my heart because I write about this. Since 2007, I've been dealing with this issue, although I think it had to wait until President Macron and and Savoy's report come out for it to be taken seriously, which is a pity. And many of us have discussed this issue. So I have a lot that I can discuss in probably 10 hours, but I'll do it in 1 minute. I think the discussion on the return of cultural property, return restitution, repatriation, which is also associated with reparation in some places, is also a question of decolonization. Decolonizing the way we do things, decolonizing our minds, decolonizing the narratives and things that have been told about us. It's about empowering ourselves. I don't think restitution is just a matter of picking up material from museums in the North and bringing it back. It's a question of balancing of power. It's a question of trying to see how our voices can also carry something. Today, it's a pity that our arts and culture decorate the best museums abroad. Our dead are still held in European museums and medical facilities. Some of our communities cannot rest as they are haunted by the loss and retention of not only their heritage, but also their relatives that are now just considered museum specimens. And South Africa has an example, a good example, because you brought back Sarah Baartman. And I think you have a voice to talk. You have a voice to say something about this. We need definitely to take this very seriously and to move beyond the discussion being dictated from the North. We have to have a level playing ground where the voice of the South, those who have suffered, starting from the communities in the village, to the museums and other institutions, to the governments, playing a role in negotiating and not leaving this voice being dictated from the North. I think that we owe it to our children. We owe it to arts, culture, and heritage to seriously look at this issue, because we also need to look at it as an economic issue. I mean, for how many years have this heritage created wealth in the North? If you're talking about museums, why can we not do that? Why should we be dictated that in order for these things to be brought, we have to meet these conditions? When they were taken, they were not taken because we are not meeting conditions. And they should be brought back at our own terms. And even if we decide that we are going to bury some of them or throw some of them in the forest so that the spirits of the communities and the peoples can relax, let us do that. So for me, it is a matter of releasing ourselves from the yoke of that colonialism that is remaining. It is the remaining agenda from our fight for independence and colonial yoke. And I think when we look at it like that, we'll be standing a better chance of negotiating with these powers that are telling us that they can create terms for us to negotiate the return of our material. We are not asking the removal of everything from the museum from the North. We do know that some of that material have acquired their own lives in the North. They act as ambassadors. But we also know that there are some which are totally and very strictly and very deeply connected to the spirit of the people up to the present. For example, human remains. We need those ones back. So my position, and I believe position of many and those who feel it in their own spaces, is that it is not a negotiable issue. And if negotiation has to take place, let us negotiate from a position of strength rather than being from a position of sympathy. And we owe it to our children that we actually solve this problem once and for all. And I'm grateful that the African states understand this. I'm grateful that African Union understands it and is putting it in the forefront, and understand that UNESCO is putting it through the 1970 convention that we have worked on. And we hope that we will be able to come out of this in a way that is respectful of everybody, that is accommodative of everybody, and that is going to satisfy all these needs, including spiritual needs of our communities that have suffered for over 100 years. And no place demonstrates this than Southern Africa, where human beings were excavated, immediately they were buried, and their bodies transferred, and we know where they are. We don't want this to continue forever.
Fascinating insights there, and very strong words from you there, Professor. Thank you very much. As I said, this isn't just another one of those panel discussions where we talk and talk. It is a space where we create workable solutions to make sure that our arts, culture and heritage creates wealth and unity for the African continent. Minister Mthethwa, you are the one that was our host today. Final remarks from you?
Thank you very much, and thanks to my fellow panelists. I think as we move forward, I want to repeat the point which I shared with my colleagues, ministers of culture, which we agree on, that 2021 has to be used effectively to promote arts, culture, and heritage. If we fail this year, we'll only have ourselves to blame. That is why we thought that we need to come with a program which is going to be responding to this declaration for this year and beyond. And one of such programs, as I said, is to deepen Africa Month, which is a precursor to the Africa Day, celebrating our Africanness and ensuring that we deepen the consciousness of Africanism amongst our people. Two, the issue of digitizing AU archival material is very important from the OAU time and so on. Three, should ensure that this year in particular, we ratify the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance. Four, we are urging and encouraging all countries on the continent recognize together with us as the Southern region, Southern African Development Community, the 23rd of March, because that day is very sacrosanct to SADC because of the Battle of Quito Cuanavale in Angola, which literally liberated the Southern African region, which was the last one to be liberated. The other point is that we are commemorating the
It looks like we have lost the minister there, but very, very interesting insights, very, very sobering thoughts today on building Africa better using arts, culture and heritage. The minister did mention that we need to use 2021 effectively to build to make sure that the arts, culture and heritage space is self-sufficient. And Angela did mention that the AU's policies are at implementation implementing stage, my English there. But anyway, that is it from me, Zinathi Guma. Thank you to my panelists for joining me. That was Honorable Minister Nathi Mthethwa, the South African Minister of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, Angela Martins, the AU Director for Arts and Culture, and Professor George Abungu, the CEO of Okello Abungu Heritage Consultants. Thank you very much for my panelists for joining me as we celebrate Africa World Heritage Day. And from me, Zinathi Guma on CNBC Africa, it's goodbye for now.